Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. David Wolf here with OUAB in the Kitchen, at-home edition. This evening we have a Euro-American theme, and we're going to start with a Mediterranean meatball. So in a preheated skillet, I'm going to put about a tablespoon of olive oil. And I'm going to allow that olive oil to heat up just enough to be able to allow it to shimmer and not quite smoke. We have an onion that we've chopped up in advance, adding that onion to the skillet and allowing that onion to just pick up a very light color. A hue of perhaps not quite caramelized, but just starting to show some translucency, some transparency, a nice aromatic coming off of the onion as it's cooking is our objective here. I'm going to let that cook until I get that nice smell. And behind it we have chopped some parsley. This is 3 cloves of chopped garlic, not parsley, chopped garlic, and that garlic is going to just sweat briefly so that we can pick up the nice sweet smell of the garlic as it's cooking in the skillet. While this is happening, I'm going to start the mixture for the meatball, and for that I'm going to take a stainless steel bowl, and in that stainless steel bowl I'm going to put in 2 eggs that I cracked in advance. And those 2 eggs are basically going to get whisked until they're nice and homogenized. Pretty much the same fashion that you would scramble eggs for a breakfast meal period. Nice and smooth, almost creamy looking in texture is what our objective is. Behind that I'm going to mill in some salt and pepper into the egg mixture. The milled pepper I like. You can use any kind of ground pepper that you may have at home. Any of those salt and peppers work. And then behind that I'm going to put in the breadcrumb, which we have measured out for you. And with that same spoon I'm going to blend together those the egg and the Parmesan, the egg and the breadcrumbs. Follow it up with half of the Parmesan cheese that you have in your kit for this particular dish. Meanwhile, you see that the onions are cooking nice and slowly, not getting any color. And I'm going to put in half of the parsley that we have on your tray or in your meal kit for a flavoring agent. You can allow this to cool down just enough before you add it to the onion mixture, or if you're going to cook them right away, feel free to put it immediately into the breadcrumb and egg mixture. Allow that to be incorporated together so it's nice and smooth. Same process you would use for any meatball, meatloaf, any type of ground meat mixture like that. Then you have a 10-ounce portion of ground beef sirloin, which I'm going to add to that, into that, what we would refer to as a panada, is what we call that in the industry. And that ground meat gets worked in with that breadcrumb, Parmesan, parsley, egg, onion, and garlic mixture so that everything's smooth and works together. I'm also going to put in some dry leaf oregano. You could use fresh oregano if you chose to, but I think it might be a little bit too strong. Plus, it's hard to get all that oregano used when you buy it at the grocery store. It's hard to get that little unit unless you to use it all before it goes bad. Or you can simply dry it out and have dried fresh oregano, which is superior to what we would normally get in the grocery stores when we buy dry herbs. So at this point I'm going to scoop those meatballs, and I'm going to use a scooper, what I call a disher, and you have on your sheets it's a number 30, and that number 30 is what we would use to prepare that 30 of these in a quart measure. So it's not terribly important that you have that size scoop. You can just freehand portion these meatballs so that they are the size that you want them to be. I just like some order and discipline to these, which is why I use a scoop measure. You may have an ice cream scoop at home, work out just fine for the same application. These are going to be baked in a 350 degree oven at home and probably take about 12 to 18 minutes till they're nice and golden brown on the outside. You should yield around 12 meatballs based on this size of scoop that I'm using this evening. But the scoop and the size you may have at home could be a little bit bigger. It's really up to you and what your family wants to have there. So these are going to go into the oven and they'll start cooking for about 8 minutes or so. Meanwhile, I have a tray with the pork tenderloins set up, and I basically just flattened out the tenderloins just a little bit. I'm going to season them on both sides with salt and pepper. And the pepper that I'm using is a cracked black pepper. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to preheat the skillet. Cracked black pepper, a little bit sprinkled on both sides of each little tenderloin medallion. This is probably the most tender cut of the pork. It comes from the loin section. Very much like a beef tenderloin fillet steak would be, only from the hog animal. So the kosher salt and the cracked black pepper do the job. In the French cuisine, they refer to this sauce that we're making in this pan as an OUAB sauce, and that's what we're producing here. A little bit of olive oil is going to go into the skillet. About a tablespoon again of olive oil, and I allow that to heat in the same fashion that we did for the meatball mixture, and just enough to be able to get it to start smoking. And we're going to have those tenderloin medallions go directly into the skillet with a fair measure of the salt and cracked black pepper on each medallion. There's going to be a little bit of the peppercorn and salt left behind. I like to keep that and put it in the skillet with the remainder of the other items, with the oil and ingredients that we have there on the list. So we're going to watch these pork tenderloins as they cook. Keep those nice and neat. Meanwhile, I'm going to gather the items that are necessary to make the pan sauce, and that's going to be a white wine. We're going to for reduction. Some of the parsley that's in your kit specifically for the pork tenderloin dish. I'm going to work on some of the finishing items for the dish, and one of those finishing items is a marinara sauce. Now, we prepared that marinara sauce in advance for you. So the same skillet that I used to be able to cook those meatballs, I'm going to use to be able to reheat that marinara sauce. Because it already has some flavor, there's no sense in having to wash two skillets. So that's going to go directly into that skillet and allow it to come to a slow simmer. And as the meatballs come out of the oven, about 12 minutes later, we're going to allow those to simmer a bit in that marinara sauce. We're also going to reheat the penne pasta, which we prepared in advance for you, cooked it al dente, so that can be just reheated, and we'll do that here in a moment. Meanwhile, I'm going to allow those pork tenderloins to cook until they have a nice caramelization on the exterior, nice golden color, before they get turned for the first time. I'm going to allow those to continue to finish cooking in that same manner. Manage your heat so it doesn't get too hot. That's going to matter a great deal. So I have prepared some simmering water for me to be able to allow myself to be able to reheat the penne pasta with. And so reheating the penne pasta is really quite simple. Just adding it to the water. And I have here in the instructional kitchen, we have all the right utensils to work with. You could simply strain it if you chose to, or you could choose to take it out with one of these tools that we call the spider, which allows it to come out of the water without any interruption. So to that marinara sauce, you have a stem of sweet basil. That sweet basil, I typically will save a top of that sweet basil from that stem, and I'll use that as an accent garnish. The remainder of the basil, I'm going to simply hand tear a few times and add that to the marinara sauce as it starts to simmer for an additional level of flavor in that dish. So now that the pork has been turned once, we can start to see some color develop on both sides. At this point in that same pan, you could take it out of the skillet and finish it off in the oven, but for this evening I'm simply going to add the white wine directly to that skillet and allow that white wine to reduce. That nice steam vapor has a very good smell. The alcohol cooks off on this white wine. It's basically a Chablis that we're using for tonight's dish, allowing that to simmer, and those pork tenderloins will continue to cook as we go through that process. Manage the heat, always and forever. These penne pastas will come out, drain them the best you can. They're tubular, so we will have to tilt that draining system so that we are sure that we're getting all the water out of each of those tubes of penne pasta. Getting those out. After that, I'm going to just drizzle a small amount of olive oil, mill a little bit of salt and pepper, just to give it some interesting flavor, and a little bit of the Parmesan that's been reserved from the meatball mixture. We'll rest that off to the side. We'll come back to that for the plating process. As the reduction of the white wine occurs, we're going to enter in the heavy cream and allow that to develop flavor. You have the juices from the preparation of the pork that are extracting from the pork tenderloins, and that's going to make a nice pan sauce that you'll enjoy shortly. You also have a measure of French beans and some julienne bell peppers. Those I'm just simply going to reheat in the same manner that we did the penne pasta. And in that, we're going to put those into a skillet that you can preheat in advance if you like. And this basically a little oil or a little butter to be able to season the vegetable will do the job. So the marinara sauce is simmering nicely. The vegetables for the pork dish just need to retherm just a bit because they're going to go into a hot skillet with that fat, and they're just going to just saute briefly. Doing your best not to transfer too much of the water from reheating that into your skillet. See a couple of rogue penne pastas from earlier. We're going to capture those. Mill salt and pepper on the vegetable. And lastly, to reheat, I'm going to reheat the linguine pasta that we prepared, again al dente, in advance for you to be served with your pork dish. And you can see the pork is cooking very nicely. The sauce, the cream is reducing down. Just going to turn these pork tenderloin medallions over, allow them to pretty much baste in that cream as it's cooking. 12 minutes has expired. We're going to pick up the meatballs out of the oven. And for those, we're going to put them into the simmering sauce and allow those to baste in the marinara sauce for that dish. You have some reserved parsley. Some of that I'm going to put in the sauce. Some I'm going to use as an accent garnish. But I think it's good to be able to allow those meatballs to simmer. If you're not sure if they're done, if you have a thermometer, cook them to 155. If you do not, simply split one in half and make sure that they're fully cooked on the inside, that there's no red raw meat showing, and you should be in good shape for that dish. As the cream reduces down, we're going to add in a measure of chopped parsley to that cream sauce and allow that to finish. I have a strainer set up over here on the side for me to work with. I'm going to drain that linguine pasta into the sink, and I'll be right back. Allowing that linguine to just rest on the side. We'll come back to that. Meatballs simmering very nicely. So the plating process for the meatballs, I have the penne pasta, lightly seasoned with some salt and pepper, a little Parmesan. Drop those in the center of a serving bowl. And behind that, I'm just going to simply drop in some of the meatballs, whatever portion you are going to have, either family style, individual service, however you want to present your meal this evening. And then on top of those meatballs, I like to dress it with some of the marinara sauce. Allow that to simmer off to the side somewhere, and then to finish that dish with a little bit of grated Parmesan, and then that basil top that we talked about. So that's the meatball dish. For the pork tenderloin dish, you can use that same bowl that you had for the fettuccine because it's already there, and why clean or dirty another one? Kind of toss that fettuccine in that same bowl. A little bit of the remaining chopped parsley. What I'm going to do is take a little bit of the pan sauce from the skillet and put it on the noodles to give them a little bit of character so that they're nice, flavorful noodles. Mill a little bit of pepper onto the linguine pasta. And I'm going to plate a small portion of the linguine pasta onto a 10-inch dinner plate that we have here this evening. And off to the side, I'm going to place the vegetables that we have. This is a service for 2. You might make 3 servings out of this. Really depends on your personal preference. Dressing it with the 2 nice medallions of pork tenderloin on top of the noodle. You might have 3. Really depends on your preference. Again, on your appetite. And then a little bit of the sauce drizzled over the top of the pork medallions. If you have saved any of the chopped parsley from previous preparation, feel free to just accent garnish that dish with a little bit of that chopped parsley. So these are our 2 meals that we prepared this evening: Mediterranean meatball and a nice pork tenderloin au poivre. Enjoy. Hopefully we'll see you again this semester.